If you want to run a city or a large town in D&D, perhaps I can help. Here at Tails Arcane we talk about D&D, TTRPGs and fantasy world building. And in today's video I want to focus on how to develop, prepare and run large urban environments in D&D. Now, Pathfinder, D&D, these tips are really system agnostic. We can apply them to any TTRPG. I'll be using the language of D&D throughout this video because D&D is the system that I'm most familiar with. But again, these tips are for any system really that involves fantasy and urban environments. We're going to cover three main points. Firstly, we're going to talk about how to develop your city from scratch and make it feel unique and distinct among the other settlements in your world. Then we're going to talk about districts and how splitting up your city into multiple smaller areas is going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to running the game on the night. And finally, we'll talk about how much content you actually need to prepare. How much is too much, and how much content do you need to run the city smoothly on the night? Merchants, stores, items, city guard, we'll cover all of that in depth. Before we jump into the first of the 3 points, I want to give a really quick shout out to D&D Kickstarter. Now, this is not a promotion or a sponsored thing. I just want to see this Kickstarter come to fruition, and the people behind it are from my hometown of Glasgow, so I really wanted to give them a little bit of support. The Kickstarter is for a documentary called Session Zero. And the documentary is basically covering 3 years of the filmmaker's younger brother getting into D&D, falling in love with the hobby, forming a group with his friends to play D&D, and then playing it continuously across 3 years. It's about what D&D has meant for these young people, how it's brought them together and kept them together through this very tumultuous time of growing up through their early teenage years. The trailer is available, you can watch it over on the Kickstarter, there's a link in the description on this video, and just looking at that trailer and seeing these young people getting into D&D at an age far younger than I was when I got into D&D, and just falling in love with this hobby that we all love, really put a smile on my face. But anyway, thank you for sitting through my promotional chat, and now let's talk about cities and towns in D&D. If we're going to create and prepare a city, we're doing so from the assumption that the players are going to spend some time there. If you think your players are likely to just pass through, grab some supplies and continue on to some other destination, I wouldn't recommend meticulously following all of the steps and tips in this video. But if you plan to run a couple of sessions in a city, maybe a longer adventure that takes place in one urban setting, then you're in the right place. Creating a city in D&D for me means 2 things. Firstly, it means coming up with a physical feature, a defining physical aspect of the city. It could be something about the location that defines the city and gives it a reason to exist, or it could be some element within the city, like a particular building around which the rest of the city is growing up. The second thing is picking a theme, an overall aesthetic and vibe for the city. This is going to define how the city looks, how it feels, and what kind of stories you're going to tell there. A physical feature could be something like a lake or a river around which the city or the town has grown up. It could be the fact that the city is built on top of a huge floating rock that drifts among the clouds. Or it could be something a little bit humbler, like the fact that the city is built on the intersection of 2 trading routes, something that defines why the city would exist in the first place. Maybe the city is built in the intersection of trade routes, or it could be in the cleft between 2 huge mountains, making it a very defensible position. The point here is that the city shouldn't have just dropped out of the sky and landed in the middle of a random plain. There should be some reason where the players can say, oh, we can kind of see why a city would have been built here. Of course, it doesn't have to be something naturally occurring. For example, a city might have grown up around a great university. It could be the fact that the city is built around a mine, a natural resource which has necessitated the construction of housing and then of stores, and that's kind of spiraled from there to form the city. The physical feature is going to make your city feel a bit different from all the other cities the players have passed through, or at least it should do. But it's also the why of the city, and that's incredibly important for building immersion and also for giving you ideas later on. If you know from the very start that the city is built around an ancient university, then you know some more stuff about the flavour of the city and the kind of stories that might be told here in an ancient academic town. The second thing you want to come up with is the aesthetic and the theme of the city. So for example, a city's theme could be that it's an industrial city. So instantly we're thinking about foundries and factories, tall smokestacks and chimneys belching black clouds against the sky, narrow, quite sooty, dirty streets, but perhaps an intense trade union scene with large trade unions battling with the barons of industry and guilds. All these kind of elements immediately kind of coalesce around the idea that this is an industrial town, huge shipyards. Suddenly we've got a real flavour and an idea of what the city is going to look like. That's going to help a lot when it comes to describing to your players visual elements and making them feel that they can see it in front of them, but it will also help you when it comes to deciding what kind of businesses are going to be in the town, what kind of political situations are playing out. Another example of a theme could be Gothic. My current home game is largely taking place at the moment in a Gothic city. So dark, narrow streets, gallows in the public square with corpses hanging from them, ravens wheeling overhead, a lot of stores selling arcane, strange occult elements and poisons and potions. That theme is going to help to steer you towards developing a city that feels like, my god, my cat is just yelling outside. I have to shut them out during the filming, and they do not like it. But anyway, yeah, that theme is going to be really important in giving your city a unified feel, which is going to help the players remember that city as being different from all the others. Once we have a physical feature that makes the city feel distinct from other settlements in the setting and gives it a reason to exist, and once we have the aesthetic and the overarching theme of the city, be that in an industrial, gothic, an academic city, whatever it is that's going to be the kind of defining visual and character of the city, we're going to move on to districts. Breaking your city into districts is going to make your life a lot easier. It's going to make prep more effective, and it's going to make running the game and navigating the city on the night a lot more intuitive for both you and the players. Throughout this section, I'm going to refer to, at times, a map of a city that's going to appear behind me from a city called Valwind Heights, which appeared in one of my Patreon supplements. Now this is quite a big city with quite a lot of districts. You don't need a map of this detail, or you don't need this many districts, but this would just be my example throughout this section. You want to break your city into a number of districts and give each district a name. Now in my city here I've got 9 districts, but you don't need to have 9. You could have maybe 3 or 4. That's a decent number, and these are going to be called things like the Merchants' Quarter, the East End, the Docklands, whatever you want to call them. Distinct names that indicate perhaps what is in those different districts. Each area should have its own flavour and theme, defined by what the players are going to find in those districts. So for example, in my city here, Gutterlin is a sprawling slum where the Thieves Guild operates. Then you've got Candeliers, which is kind of the market district. It's quite upmarket, full of fashionable taverns and restaurants. And then you go over to Hightown and you've got universities, colleges. It's a bit quieter, but there's a lot of students here. So that's kind of the approach you're taking, just kind of a theme for each area and a name for each area. Now, why are we doing this? The first problem a lot of DMs run into when they start prepping and running big cities is just feeling overwhelmed by having all of this content and not knowing quite how to present it to the players. The players arrive in the city and you start thinking, do I have to take them through this street by street? Do I have to give every street a name and tell that to the players? Do I have to give them a detailed map with all the individual shops and landmarks marked on that map? It can be a lot, and it can also be a lot for the players, because even if you give them a map, they can kind of feel overwhelmed about where they should go first and how to navigate the city. When you break it into districts, what you're doing is creating a number of baskets into which you're going to put content. So there's the basket that is the Docklands, the basket that is the Temple District, and into each of those baskets you'll put a number of shops, landmarks, side quests if you want to write quests for each individual area, and the players are never going to explore the city as a whole. The players are going to go to each individual basket, explore the content within that basket, and then move on to another one. And that is going to make it a lot more manageable for both the players and for you as the DM. When I'm running a city, what I have on the night are a bunch of different pages, and each page is a different district of the city. So when the players tell me that they want to go to Gutterlin, I grab the page of content that I have for Gutterlin. It's got the names of NPCs, a couple of local stores, a couple of local landmarks, and maybe some details about the one local quest that I have prepared for Gutterlin. And that's all I'm going to think about until the players tell me that they want to leave Gutterlin and go somewhere else. In front of the players is a map like this, showing them just the city and the names of the districts. So they don't have to worry about what street they're looking for or where they'll find precisely where they'll find a particular tavern or business. They can just ask an NPC in the street, hey, we're looking for this business, and that NPC will say, oh, you'll find that in Gutterlin. And then the players will turn to me and say, great, we want to go to Gutterlin, and I initiate that basket of content. The players are never actually experiencing the city as a whole, just the individual districts. And each individual district runs essentially like a very small town or village, which most DMs wouldn't feel particularly intimidated by when it comes to prepping and running. This method I'm recommending is essentially just creating a bunch of villages in terms of your content behind the DM screen, and then meshing them together and making the players feel as though they're experiencing one big city. As a side note, a really fun thing to do to make each area feel distinct and kind of communicate to the players what sort of area they're in is to have multiple of the same business but in different areas operating slightly differently. So for example, you go to the wealthy candeliers area where all the merchants are, and a potion seller is there, and they're just selling things like healing potions, potions of resistance. Then the players go over to the slightly shadier Gutterlin area where the Thieves Guild are, and they find another potion store, but this one's selling poisons and illicit substances, things that you just couldn't get in other parts of the city. And the players on a subtle level would just register that, oh, we're in a different kind of environment here. And that's a really nice way to, through the environment, tell the story to the players and say, here's what this area feels like as opposed to this other area. You've got your baskets of content, you've got your 4 or 5 different districts that you split your city into, and you've got a rough idea of the theme and the vibe of each district in terms of wealth, law and order, and those kind of elements. What content are you putting in these baskets? How much content do you need? How much content do you actually need for each district in your city? Not as much as you might think. Let's take an area, a random area in a made-up city. Let's say it's called the Merchants Quarter, and it's in the western side of a city. And in the Merchants Quarter, we're going to have a number of stores, landmarks, and NPCs. Now, for the stores, I'm going to list maybe 3, 4 stores. Of course, there are many more than that, and if the players really want to find something that I've not listed, they really want to find a butcher for some reason, I would just say there's a butcher or a baker or whatever it is they're looking for, and I can improvise that on the spot. I'm only going to prepare maybe 3 or 4 key stores for that area. My prep for the Merchants Quarter is going to look like a document that says Merchants Quarter at the top and then has a list of stores and other things, but let's start with the stores. So I would probably create for the Merchants Quarter, since it's going to be merchant focused, maybe 4 or 5 stores. And when I say create a store, I mean the bare bones. The name of the store, the name of the merchant, and maybe 1 or 2 distinctive details about that store or merchant, but really just 1 or 2. So let's say we have Tailors, and they're going to be called Thread Lightly. You know, like the Breaking Bad Tread Lightly. They're going to be called Thread Lightly, and Thread Lightly is run by a gnome called John Lampster. And so on my document, I've now got Thread Lightly, probably in brackets, Tailors, and then next to that, John Lampster. And that's already basically all the information I need, but we'll go a little bit further. We'll write down gnome, because let's say John Lampster is a gnome, and any defining features, physical features. So I might just try to make this character stand out a bit more and say that John Lampster has a single tuft of dyed green hair sticking out of one side of his head. It looks like the rest of the hair has been kind of like burnt away perhaps at some point, or shaved away, whatever it is. Again, now we've got the name of the store, name of the owner, maybe the race of the owner, and 1 little physical feature like this odd fact that they have a tuft of green hair sticking out the side of their head. Now I want to add 1 detail that's going to inform any roleplay related to John Lampster. And the detail that I'm going to add is that he's obsessed with royalty. And that's all I'll write down in the sheet, obsessed with royalty. And in my head, that will remind me in the night of a couple of fun ideas I might have had swimming around my head about how to roleplay this character. Maybe all around the store he has images of the king, and commemorative plates with the king's face on it, and his dream is to one day tailor for the king and all this kind of stuff. Now again, that might not come up, but it just means that when the players go in there, there's going to feel like there's been prep done. They're going to have this sense that, oh, this was a pre-existing store and we've walked into it, but whether or not we walked into it, that store already existed, and that's such a great way to immerse the players. But again, all I have on the paper in front of me is the store, the name of the store, the the name of the owner, and one or two sentences, potentially just one sentence, describing them and you know what they're into, the fact that he's just obsessed with royalty. That's all I need prepped. I'm going to do that maybe 4 or 5 times, and now I have all the stores for the Merchants Quarter, and that's probably going to be less than like 50 words on my document. Now the next step is obviously to write down a huge list of every possible item sold in that store, an inventory of all the potential merchandise and all the prices. No, don't do that. That is a waste of your time, and it's just too much stress. Instead, go on Google and search for D&D stores and prices, or D&D shops and prices. You will find website after website that has done all the hard work for you. You will find spreadsheets with all of the potential items that you could find in these stores, organized by store, all with the official prices from the official D&D books, so you know that they're relatively balanced. And you can just screenshot this stuff or bookmark it and have it on a tablet close to hand on the night, copy and paste it in a document and print that off. I have that stuff always at the ready, and when the players go into a store and they want to buy something, I don't find out what that specific store sells. I just grab my document, my pre-made list that I got off the internet of all these items, and you know, we're ready to go. Another really important thing to remember is if a player goes into a shop and says, "What's for sale?" by all means mention 1 or 2 key items that you've decided that shop sells, or maybe a bit different from others. But remember that it's incumbent on the players to tell you what they're looking for. It's just not practical to have players come in and get a full list, breakdown of everything in the store. Instead say, "What are you looking for?" And they will tell you, and then you respond to that. Once you've prepared 4 or 5 stores in the very simplistic style that we've just covered, you can add a couple of landmarks. So these could be maybe a statue of a local philanthropist, or someone who's been a local hero. It could be a little square with a fountain in it, perhaps an abandoned house on the edge of the district. Just some little elements that you can add in that maybe aren't particularly for the players to interact with, but which either tell stories, reinforce themes of the area or of the city as a whole, and these are just the things you'll mention when the players first arrive in the area and they're walking between stores, and you're describing, oh, as you walk by this particular street, you look down, you see there's a gallows at the end of the street. Now you don't actually have to keep track of where that gallows is, it's just somewhere in that basket of content you have that thing written down and ready to mention in passing. Now that's the really practical stuff. If you have all of that content that I've just discussed prepared for each area in your city, let's say you've got 4 areas in your city, 4 districts, and in each one you have a couple of stores, a couple of landmarks, and maybe one little local quest in each one. That is going to cover you. That's going to feel like a really content-rich, dense, well-prepared city. The players are going to arrive and they're going to feel that this is a living, breathing space that was here before they arrived and will be here after they leave. But let's zoom back and add in a few extra elements, because there's always more kind of world building we can do to make the city as a whole feel a bit more distinct. So a couple of key areas to think about. Firstly, who keeps order in this city? I like to kind of try to put a bit of a spin on just having the city watch. You can always have a city watch or a sort of armoured guardsman walking around the streets, but if you can make it a bit more interesting, maybe give them an unusual name like the Iron Eyes. That was the group that looked after this city behind me here, and the Iron Eyes had a little bit of lore behind them. They were led by a particularly kind of thuggish commissioner, and even though the players don't necessarily interact with them all the time, it's just nice to have this kind of the sense that this city watch is a little bit distinct from any of the others in the other cities. It's also really good to think about local festivals. I love having, when players arrive in a city, having the city maybe setting up for a particular street festival that commemorates some unique event or unique piece of lore related to the city. It could be something like a battle that took place, a siege, a victory that they celebrate each year. It could be, I love things like festivals of lights. Perhaps the players arrive and there are, at dusk, people walk through the streets with lanterns. Maybe something that feels a bit Venetian, people putting on strange masks. Adding these sort of things in, again, even if they don't play a big role in the plot, in the larger adventure you're trying to run, they can just make the city feel a little bit more lived in, a little bit more real. And it goes almost any element you add at this larger level to kind of enforce the culture of the city, I think is great. It's also worth giving some consideration to who runs the city and how they were put in their current position of power. So maybe it's a mayor, and if it's a mayor, well, are they elected? And does that mean there might be an election coming up? Maybe there's different political factions, rivals who are trying to get in a new mayor or something like that. Taking a little moment to just kind of add some depth and detail to the rulership of the city, again, even if it doesn't interact with the players, is going to help you role play the city as a whole. That stuff is good, but again, it's not essential. The key thing is just to have these districts with the content within them, the overarching physical theme of the city, like the location, and of course the vibe of the city. We're talking about that sort of aesthetic of the city as a whole. If you can cover all of those elements, it will probably take you a couple of hours of prep. I would say you could get all of that we just talked about done in 2 hours of prep. And then on the night, it's going to feel amazing for the players, and it's going to feel a lot easier for you because you're not trying to run some giant... God, my cat is still yelling outside. She's here. This is Titch. I have 2 cats, Lily and Titch, and they get very disturbed with the concept of not being allowed to go everywhere in the house all the time. Isn't that right? Anyway, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. I hope the video was useful. I hope you get a chance to go over and check out the Session Zero Kickstarter. Titch, get off the table, please. And thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel. And as always, massive love for my patrons who make this channel possible, who funded the camera and the equipment that I'm using. Titch is back. Jesus. She smells of fish. Okay, guys, have a great day. I'll see you soon.